It began with a single step, not a march to war and not a walk to the gallows. It began with a dance. In the sweltering heat of July 1518, a woman stepped out of her door and into the history books, not because she was a queen or a saint, but because she became the patient zero of the strangest plague mankind has ever known. She began to move her feet in a rhythmic, jerking motion. There was no music. There were no instruments. There was only the sound of her heavy breathing and the slap of her shoes against the cobblestones. She danced until her feet blistered. She danced until her shoes filled with blood. She danced until she collapsed from exhaustion, only to stand up and start again. Within days, she was not alone. 30 people had joined her. Within a month, 400 people were thrashing in the streets of Strasbourg. They were screaming for mercy, begging the movement to stop, but their bodies would not obey. Authorities didn't know it yet, but they were witnessing a horror that science still struggles to explain. They called it a curse. They called it possession. But this wasn't a celebration. This was a funeral march set to a rhythm only they could hear. This is the true story of the dancing plague. Now. Let us turn back the pages of the years. Let the noise of the modern world fade away into the distance. Imagine you are no longer where you are. You are drifting back through the centuries, through the mist of time, arriving in a place where the only light comes from the sun and the flickering of candles. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. We are walking down the narrow, winding streets of the Holy Roman Empire. The air is warm. The city is quiet. We are here to witness a mystery unfold, slowly, beneath the summer sun. Listen to the sound of the wind in the timber-framed houses. Listen to the flow of the River Rhine nearby. You are safe here, merely a watcher in the shadows of history. Let us begin. To understand the woman, we must first understand the world that made her. The year is 1518. We find ourselves in the city of Strasbourg, a jewel of the Holy Roman Empire, nestled on the western border of what we now call France. But this is not the France of glittering palaces and wide boulevards. This is a medieval labyrinth. Imagine the streets. They are narrow, crooked veins of cobblestone that twist between tall, timber-framed houses. The upper stories of these houses lean outward, overshadowing the alleys below, creating permanent tunnels of shade even at high noon. The wood is old, dark, and smelling of resin and rain. The plaster is cracked, bearing the scars of a city that has seen too much history. It is mid-July, the height of summer. The heat in the city is not just a temperature. It is a physical weight. It presses down on the rooftops. It settles into the dust of the streets, and it clings to the skin of every man, woman, and child. The air is thick and still. There is no breeze coming off the River Rhine today. The river itself moves sluggishly, a ribbon of gray-green water reflecting the harsh, white glare of the sun. In the marketplace, the sounds are muted. The usual roar of commerce is dampened by the oppressive heat. A blacksmith's hammer rings out in the distance, clang, 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 a slow, rhythmic heartbeat of the city. A dog barks lazily from a shaded doorway. A cart, laden with grain, trundles over the stones, the wooden wheels groaning under the weight. But beneath this sleepy surface, there is tension. If you look closely at the faces of the people passing by, you see it. You see the gaunt hollows of their cheeks. You see the sharpness of their eyes. Strasbourg is a city that is starving. The harvest has been poor. The winters have been cruel. The price of bread has risen so high that for many, A loaf is worth more than a day's labor. There is a sense of desperation woven into the very fabric of the air. The people are devout. They fill the cathedrals, praying to Saint Vitus, praying to the Virgin, asking for relief from the hunger, the sickness, and the fear. They believe that God is angry. They believe that the stars have aligned against them. Superstition is not a story here. It is a survival mechanism. Every shadow could be a demon. Every sudden wind could be an omen dot. It is in this atmosphere, this cauldron of heat, hunger, and holy fear that a door opens on a quiet street. The street is called the Rue du Jeu d'Enfants, or the Street of the Children's Game, a darkly ironic name for what is about to happen. The door belongs to a modest house. It opens slowly, the hinges creaking in the silence of the afternoon. The sunlight catches the dust motes dancing in the entryway. And from the darkness of the house, a woman steps out. Her name is Frau Troffea. History has preserved her last name, but we know little of her face. Let us imagine her now. She is not young, nor is she old. She is a woman of her time worn down by the relentless labor of survival. Her dress is simple, made of coarse wool that feels too heavy for this July heat. Her hair is tucked away beneath a linen cap. Stained slightly with the soot of the hearth dot, she stands on her doorstep for a moment, just a silhouette against the dark interior of her home. Why did she step out? Was she going to the market? Was she going to fetch water from the communal well? Or was she simply looking for a breath of air that didn't taste of stale smoke and anxiety? She looks up at the sky. The sun is a blinding white disk. She looks down at the street. The cobblestones are uneven, worn smooth by centuries of feet. Her husband is inside. Perhaps he calls out to her, "Woman, where are you going?" Perhaps he is asleep, exhausted by the heat. We do not know. All we know is that Frau Troffea takes one step forward, then another. She reaches the center of the narrow street dot, and then she stops. The silence of the street seems to stretch out. The blacksmith's hammer in the distance stops. The birds in the eaves of the houses seem to hold their breath. Frau Troffea's shoulder twitches. It is a small movement, barely valid. A spasm. Then her head tilts to the side sharply as if she is listening to a sound that no one else can hear. Is it a melody? Is it a voice? Or is it the thrumming of her own blood in her ears, driven by the heat and the hunger? She lifts her left foot. She places it down. She lifts her right foot. A hop, a step. A turn dot, she begins to dance dot. This is not the graceful waltz of the court. This is not the joyful folk dance of the harvest festival where villagers hold hands and spin in circles laughing. No, this is something else entirely. Her movements are stiff. Her arms jerk outward, as if she is a marionette puppet being pulled by invisible strings. Her head lolls back. Staring directly into the blinding sun dot, she spins. Once, twice, thrice, her heavy wool skirt flares out around her. Her wooden shoes' sabots clatter loudly against the stone. Clack, clack, clack. The sound echoes off the walls of the narrow alley. It is a lonely, rhythmic sound. There is no fiddle player on the corner. There is no drum. There is only the woman, the heat, and the stone. 1 minute passes. Then 2. Usually a person dances for a song, perhaps 3 or 4 minutes, and then stops, laughing. Out of breath dot, Frau Troffea does not stop. 5 minutes pass. The sweat begins to bead on her forehead. It rolls down her temples, soaking into the linen of her cap. Her breath starts to come in short, sharp gasps. Ha, ha. But her feet do not slow down. If anything, they speed up. Neighbors begin to peek out of their windows. The wooden shutters creak open. Faces appear in the shadows, an old woman clutching a rosary, a young boy with dirt on his face. They watch in confusion. Is she drunk? It is early in the day for wine. Is she happy? She does not look happy. Her face is a mask. It is devoid of expression. Her eyes are wide, unblinking, fixed on something far away. Her mouth is slightly open. She looks like a woman in a trance, or perhaps a woman who is asleep while standing up. Her husband comes out of the house. He is a sturdy man, confused and embarrassed. He calls her name. Trofia. Stop this. Come inside. She does not turn. She does not acknowledge him. She spins away from his outstretched hand, her feet moving in that strange, rhythmic shuffle. Left, right, hop. Left, right, spin. He tries to grab her arm. Her arm is rigid, hard as iron. She pulls away with surprising strength and continues her macabre performance. He steps back, fear beginning to creep into his eyes. He looks at the neighbors watching from the windows. He sees their judgment, but he also sees their unease. This is not normal behavior. This is not simple madness. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. The sun moves across the sky, casting longer shadows in the alley. The heat does not break. Frau Trofia is now drenched in sweat. Her dress clings to her body. Her face is flushed a deep, alarming red. Her chest heaves violently with every breath. Any normal person would have collapsed by now. The human body is not designed to sustain high-energy movement for this long without pause. The muscles burn. The lungs scream for oxygen. The heart hammers against the ribs like a trapped bird, but she continues. The clatter of her shoes becomes a metronome for the street. Clack, clack, clack. It is a sound that begins to grate on the nerves of those watching. It is relentless. It is mechanical. Let us pause and consider the physiology of what is happening. When you run or dance, your body releases endorphins. For the first few minutes, there is energy. But soon, the lactic acid builds up in the muscles. The legs begin to feel heavy, like lead. The feet begin to swell inside the shoes. Frau Trofia is wearing wooden shoes. These are hard, unforgiving blocks of carved wood. They are not meant for dancing. They are meant for walking in mud, for protecting the feet from falling tools. As she stomps and spins, the hardwood rubs against the soft skin of her ankles and toes. First, the skin turns red. Then, a blister forms, a small pocket of fluid protecting the raw flesh underneath. As she continues to dance, the blister pops. The raw skin rubs against the rough wood. The pain must be sharp, stinging with every step. Does she feel it? Does she feel the skin peeling away? If she does, she gives no sign. Her brain seems to have disconnected from her body's pain receptors. Or perhaps the compulsion to move is simply stronger than the pain. It is a hunger that cannot be satisfied. An hour passes. 2 hours. The spectacle has drawn a crowd. People from the neighboring streets have heard the commotion. They stand in a circle, keeping a safe distance, as if she is a fire that might spark and burn them. They whisper to one another, "Is it a demon?" One asks, "Is it the French sickness?" Asks another. "She has sinned," an old woman mutters, crossing herself. "God is punishing her." But there is no divine light here. Only a woman, alone in the center of the crowd, dancing herself toward the grave. Her movements have become sloppy, uncoordinated, yet the rhythm remains. She stumbles, nearly falling, catching herself on one hand, and scrambling back up to her feet without breaking the beat. Her husband has stopped trying to catch her. He sits on the doorstep, his head in his hands, weeping softly. He knows, deep down, that the woman who stepped out of his house this morning is gone. Something else has taken her place. The sun begins to dip below the timber-bird roof lines. The sky turns a bruised purple and orange. The shadows in the street grow long and dark, stretching out like fingers reaching for the dancing. Woman Dot, she has been moving for hours. Her shoes are now dark with moisture. It is not just sweat. A thin trickle of crimson blood seeps from the heel of her left shoe. It leaves faint, dark smears on the gray cobblestones. A map of her agony written on the street. The crowd has thinned. People need to eat. They need to sleep. They go back to their homes, locking their doors tight, lighting candles against the encroaching night. They tell their children to stay away from the window, but even through the thick walls, they can hear it clack, clack, shuffle, clack. Frau Trophia dances on. She dances as the stars come out. She dances as the moon rises over the cathedral spire. She is a lonely figure in the dark, a silhouette twitching and spinning in the moonlight. She is the pendulum of a clock that will not stop ticking. She does not know it, but she is merely the first spark. The fire she has started in her own mind is about to jump. It is about to spread. The air in Strasbourg is charged with a psychic tension, waiting for a release. As she dances into the night, her exhaustion becomes a trance state. She is no longer in Strasbourg. She is somewhere else, trapped in a loop of her own making. And tomorrow, when the sun rises, she will still be there. And the neighbors who watched her with fear, some of them will begin to feel a twitch in their own legs, a need to join her, a need to surrender to the rhythm. The music has not started yet, but the dance has begun. We often think of history as a list of dates and battles, but sometimes history is a pressure cooker. Before the first foot hit the pavement, before the first drop of blood was spilled, Strasbourg was already a city on the edge of a nervous breakdown. The history books will tell you it was a holy city, a place of order and law within the Holy Roman Empire. That is a lie. The summer of 1518, Strasbourg was not a sanctuary. It was a prison without bars. The people weren't just hungry. They were being suffocated by a terror they couldn't name. The church told them their sins were rotting the crops. The nobles told them to starve in silence. And the heat was cooking them alive in their own homes. Frau Trophia didn't just start dancing for no reason. She was the spark that landed in a room full of gunpowder. This wasn't just a dance. It was the scream of a city that had been holding its breath for too long. Now. Let the image of the dancing woman fade for a moment. We will return to her soon. But first, we must widen our gaze. Let us float up, above the cobblestones, above the rooftops, and look down upon the city itself. Close your eyes. Imagine the map of Europe unfurling in your mind like an old, stained parchment. Trace your finger to the border of France and Germany, right by the river Rhine. There, sitting heavy and silent under the sun, lies Strasbourg. The year is 1518. It is a time of transition, a time of shadows. The Middle Ages are dying, and the modern world has not yet been born. We are stuck in the twilight. Let us descend into the streets and feel what they felt. To walk through. Strasbourg in 1518 is to walk through a canyon of wood and stone. The city is tight. It is enclosed by high defensive walls, designed to keep enemies out, but in this oppressive summer, they serve only to keep the heat in. The houses are tall, narrow structures, built with dark timber beams that crisscross the white plaster like the bones of a skeleton. The upper floors jut out over the streets, leaning toward each other as if they are whispering secrets. In some alleys, the roofs of opposite houses almost touch, blotting out the sky, leaving the street below in a perpetual dusty gloom. There is no modern sanitation here. A narrow gutter runs down the center of the street. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, of livestock living in backyards, of stale cooking fires and the muddy, stagnant odor of the river, but looming above it all is the cathedral, the Strasbourg Cathedral. It is a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, a mountain of pink sandstone rising out of the earth. Its spire is the tallest building in the world at this time. It pierces the sky, a finger pointing directly at God. For a modern tourist, it is beautiful. But for a peasant in 1518, looking up at that massive tower, it is overwhelming. It is a constant reminder of how small they are and how big God is. It casts a long, terrifying shadow over the city, a shadow that says, "You are being watched. You are being judged." The architecture itself feels heavy. The stone is hot to the touch. The wood is dry and brittle. The entire city feels like a tinderbox waiting for a flame, and then there is the sun. We must talk about the weather, for it is a character in this story as much as any person. The chronicles of the time tell us that the summer of 1518 was unnaturally hot. This was not a pleasant warmth. This was a biblical heat. Imagine a heat that does not break at night. The stone walls of the city absorb the sun all day long, baking like an oven, and then radiate that heat back into the narrow rooms all night. There is no escape. The air is still. Not a leaf moves on the trees. The flags on the city gates hang limp and lifeless. People sleep on their floors, hoping for a coolness that never comes. The wealthy can retreat to their country estates, to the breezy hills. But the poor? The poor are trapped in the stifling alleys of the city center. Sweat is a constant layer on the skin. It stings the eyes. It soaks the heavy wool clothes that people are forced to wear. Dehydration is common. Tempers are short. The mind, cooked by the sun and deprived of water, begins to fray at the edges. Hallucinations dance in the corners of your vision. The heat makes the world feel dreamlike, hazy, and unreal. It is in this sweltering oven that the sanity of the city begins to crack. The heat presses down on the skull. It makes the blood boil. It makes the impossible seem possible, but heat alone does not drive a city mad. There was something else gnawing at the belly of Strasbourg. Hunger. The previous years had been unkind. Harvests had failed. The winters had been brutal. The grain stores were running low. In the marketplaces, the stalls were half empty. What little bread was available was dark, hard, and impossibly expensive. Hunger does strange things to the human mind. It hollows you out. It strips away logic and reason, leaving only a primal desperation. When you are starving, the world becomes sharper, more terrifying. You feel weak, yet your nerves are vibrating with anxiety, and where there is misery, there is a search for blame. Why were they starving? Why was the sun burning them? The answer, they were told, was sin. The priests thundered from the pulpits. God is angry, they shouted. You have not prayed enough. You have not given enough. The people of Strasbourg were terrified. They believed that Saint Vitus, a powerful saint, could curse them with a plague if they did not appease him. Imagine living with that weight. Believing that your hunger is your own fault. Believing that the heat is a punishment for your thoughts. Every misfortune was a sign. A dead bird on your doorstep, a bad omen. A sudden nosebleed, a curse. Anxiety was the air they breathed. It was a mass psychological pressure. Everyone was watching everyone else. Is my neighbor sinning? Is that why my child is sick? The city was a tightly wound spring. It was a collection of thousands of terrified, starving, overheated minds, all vibrating on the same frequency of fear. They were waiting for something to happen. They were waiting for a sign. They were waiting for a release dot, so here we have the stage set for our tragedy. We have a labyrinthine city of stone and wood, trapping the heat like a furnace. We have a population that is physically exhausted, malnourished, and dehydrated. We have a spiritual atmosphere of intense dread, where demons and saints are as real as the neighbors next door. And we have a deep, unspoken desire for escape. An escape from the hunger. An escape from the heat. An escape from the crushing guilt of being alive. It is a powder keg. All it needed was a match, and on that Tuesday morning in July, on the Rue du Jardin des Enfants, the match was struck when Frau Trophia stepped out and began her jerky, silent dance. She wasn't just a madwoman. She was a vessel. She was expressing the agony of the entire city. She was doing what everyone else wanted to do. She was losing control. In a world where every action was controlled by the church, by the king, by the guilds, by the weather. Losing control was the ultimate rebellion. To dance was to surrender, to stop thinking, to stop worrying about the next meal, to simply move. The city of Strasbourg was despair in the shape of a town. And despair, when it has nowhere else to go, turns into madness. But madness, like a fire, needs fuel to grow. One woman dancing alone is a curiosity. One woman dancing alone is a tragedy. But one woman becoming two, and two becoming 10, that is a plague. As the sun set on that first day, the city held its breath. They thought it would end when she collapsed. They thought silence would return to the streets. They were wrong. The heat did not break. The hunger did not fade. And in the shadows of the alleyways, other feet began to twitch. The rhythm was spreading through the cobblestones like a virus. Frau Trophia was no longer dancing alone. The nightmare had only just begun. They told the peasants that the hunger was a test of faith. They told the mothers with empty breasts that their suffering was a gift from the Almighty, a way to purify the soul before the kingdom of heaven. But while the people of Strasbourg chewed on leather straps and boiled grass to stop the pain in their bellies, the truth was hidden behind the thick stone walls of the granaries. The famine of 1518 wasn't just an act of nature. It was a weapon of control. The archives show us that the wheat existed. The church and the wealthy merchants held the keys to the stockpiles, waiting for the prices to rise, waiting for the desperation to reach a fever pitch. As the heat wave descended like a hammer, boiling the rivers and turning the soil to dust, the authorities whispered that the devil was walking the streets. But the real devil wasn't a spirit. It was the greed that let a city starve in the shadow of a cathedral. They broke the bodies of the poor, and in doing so, they shattered their minds. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the anger fade. Let the harshness of the world dissolve into the mist. We are not here to judge the past, but to witness it, to feel it, to understand the heavy, silent atmosphere that hung over the city like a shroud. Imagine you are floating gently back down to the earth. The air is warm against your skin. The noise of the modern world has vanished. There's only the soft, rhythmic sound of the wind moving through dry wheat. We are returning to the summer of 1518. The sun is high. The shadows are short. Let us walk through the heat, safe and unseen, and listen to the story of the hunger. The summer of 1518 was not merely a season. It was a physical presence. The chronicles from the time describe a sun that seemed to have stopped moving in the sky. It hung there, a blinding eye of white fire, staring down at the city of Strasbourg without blinking. Imagine standing in the center of a wheat field just outside the city walls. The sky above is not blue. It is a pale, washed-out violet, bleached by the intensity of the light. The heat is heavy. It presses against your shoulders. It settles into the folds of your clothes. It is a dry heat, the kind that sucks the moisture from the earth and turns the soil into fine, gray powder. If you look at the horizon, the air shimmers. Heat haze rises from the ground, distorting the shapes of the trees, making the distant city walls look like they are melting. There is no sound of birds. The birds are hiding deep in the shade of the forest canopy, wings tucked tight, waiting for the cool of the evening that never seems to come. Even the insects are quiet. The usual buzz of summer is gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound is the cracking of the dry earth. Creak ... snap. The ground is thirsty. It opens up in deep fissures, begging for rain. But the clouds do not come ... inside the city. The heat is amplified. The stone walls of the cathedral absorb the sun all day long. They become like the bricks of a baker's oven. Walking down the narrow streets, you can feel the heat radiating from the buildings. It touches your face like a warm hand. The River Rhine, usually a mighty, rushing artery of trade, has slowed to a crawl. The water level has dropped, revealing the muddy banks, which now bake and crack in the sun. The smell of the river of drying mud and stagnant water drifts through the alleys, heavy and cloying. People move slowly. There is no energy for haste. To run is to waste precious water. To shout is to waste precious breath. So the city moves in a slow-motion pantomime. A woman wiping her brow with a linen cloth. A blacksmith setting down his hammer to drink from a warm bucket. A dog lying in the shadow of a cart, its sides heaving. This heat does something to the mind. When the body is this hot for this long, the boundary between reality and dream begins to blur. Thoughts become slow and sticky like honey. The world feels unreal. You begin to see things in the shimmering heat shapes that aren't there, movement in the corner of your eye. The sun is cooking the city, preparing it for the madness that is to come. Let us walk now into the heart of the city. To the marketplace. In normal times, this would be a riot of color and noise. Merchants shouting, chickens clucking, the smell of fresh herbs and roasting meat. But in July of 1518, the market is a place of whispers. The stalls are sparse. The wooden tables, usually groaning under the weight of cabbages, turnips, and sacks of grain, are largely bare. What produce is there looks tired. The vegetables are small, withered by the drought. The apples are bruised and soft. And the prices ... The prices are a horror story written in chalk. A loaf of bread, which once cost a penny, now costs a week's wages. We see a young mother standing before a baker's stall. She holds a few small coins in her hand. They are copper, worn smooth by worry. She looks at the bread. It is not the white, fluffy bread of the nobility. It is dark, dense, and heavy. She counts her coins. 1, 2, 3. She looks at the baker. He shakes his head slowly. It is not enough. She does not argue. She does not scream. She simply closes her hand over the coins, the metal warm against her palm, and turns away. Her movements are heavy with defeat. This is the quiet violence of hunger. It is not a battle fought with swords. It is a battle fought with silence. The people walking through the market are thin. Their clothes hang loosely on their frames. You can see the sharp lines of their collarbones, the hollows of their cheeks. But their eyes are bright, feverishly bright. Hunger gives the eyes a strange, haunted intensity. They scan the ground, looking for a dropped crust, a forgotten apple core. This is a population living on the edge. The biological urge to eat is the strongest force in nature. When it is denied, the brain begins to change. It switches into survival mode. Logic fades. Impulse takes over. The primitive part of the brain, the part that governs fear and movement, begins to wake up. And what of the bread that they did eat? This is a detail often lost to history, but it is the key to understanding the nightmare wheat was for the rich. The poor of Strasbourg ate rye. Rye is a hardy grain, able to survive the cold and the damp. But rye has a secret. It has a shadow. In the damp springs that preceded this hot summer, a fungus often grew on the rye stalks. It is called claviceps purpurea. To the farmers, it looked like a small, dark spur growing on the ear of the grain. They called it Wolf's tooth or cock's spur. They did not know what it was. They ground it up with the grain. They mixed it into the flour. They baked it into the dark, heavy loaves that fed the city. We know it by a different name today. We call it ergot. Ergot is a poison, but it is a strange poison. It does not kill you instantly. It works slowly, affecting the nervous system. It restricts the blood flow to the extremities, making the feet and hands burn as if they are on fire, a condition the medieval people called Saint Anthony's fire. But it also affects the mind. Ergot contains lysergic acid, the raw component of LSD. Imagine a population, starving and desperate, eating this tainted bread day after day. Small doses of a powerful hallucinogen building up in their blood. It would not cause full hallucinations immediately. Instead, it would create a sense of unease, a twitching in the muscles, a heightened sense of anxiety, a feeling that the world is vibrating. The bread tasted bitter. They ate it anyway. They dipped it in water to soften it. They gave it to their children. They were eating the very thing that would unlock the cage of their minds. So combine these elements. The relentless, blinding heat, the gnawing, empty pain of starvation, and the slow, chemical poisoning of the brain. The people of Strasbourg were not just suffering. They were being primed. They were a chemically unstable solution, waiting for a catalyst. And then there was the guilt. In 1580, there was no such thing as bad luck. If the rain did not fall, it was because you had sinned. If the crops died, it was because God was turning his face away from you. The church loomed over the city, a massive stone reminder of their inadequacy. The bells rang out every hour. Dong, dong, dong echoing through the hot streets. Each ring was a reminder. Repent, repent, repent. The people looked inward. They searched their own souls for the cause of their suffering. Did I covet my neighbor's goods? Did I work on the Sabbath? Did I dance when I should have been praying? The irony is profound. They believed that dancing was a sin of vanity, and yet the pressure of this guilt was building a compulsion to move that they could not control. They prayed to Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was the patron saint of dancers and epileptics. They believed he had the power to cure the dancing sickness, but also the power to inflict it. They lit candles in the dim, cool naves of the churches. The smell of beeswax and incense was thick. Mixing with the smell of fear, they knelt on the hard stone floors, their knees aching, their bellies empty, begging for relief. Spare us, O Lord, send the rain, fill the granaries. But the sky remained blue, the sun remained hot, and the silence of God was deafening. When you believe that the universe is punishing you, your body reacts. Stress hormones flood the system. Muscles tighten. The breath becomes shallow. The people of Strasbourg were walking around in a state of chronic, high-level panic. They were waiting for the final blow. They were waiting for the dam to break. Let us look at the night of July 13th, 1518, the night before Frau Troffea stepped out. The city is finally dark. The moon is a thin crescent, offering little light. The heat has not lifted, but the blinding glare of the sun is gone. In the small, cramped houses, people are lying in the dark. Listen to the sounds of the sleeping city, the breathing of children, the rustle of straw mattresses, the occasional cough. In her house on the Rue du Jardin des Enfants, Frau Troffea is awake. She is lying next to her husband. She can feel the hunger in her stomach, a sharp, cramping knot. She can feel the heat radiating from the walls. Her legs feel strange. They feel dotchless. A prickling sensation runs up and down her calves. Is it the ergot? Is it the anxiety? She twitches. She shifts. She cannot find peace. In her mind, she sees the face of Saint Vitus. She sees the empty market stalls. She sees the burning sun. The pressure is unbearable. She needs to do something. She needs to scream. She needs to run. She needs to move. She closes her eyes, but sleep does not come. The rhythm is already there, beating in the darkness. Thump, 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 thump. The heartbeat of a city on the verge of collapse. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again. Tomorrow, the heat will return. But tomorrow, something will snap. The silence will be broken not by a cry, but by the slap of feet against stone. The stage is fully set. The fuel has been gathered, the heat, the hunger, the poison, and the fear. All of it piled high in the narrow streets of Strasbourg. When Frau Troffea steps out into the light the next morning, she is not starting the fire. She is simply the first one to burn, but as she dances, others will recognize the feeling. They will see their own desperation mirrored in her wild eyes, and they will realize that they too have no choice but to join her. The infection is about to spread from 1 to 10 to 100. The city is about to wake up to a nightmare that will not end until the music stops. They thought they could cut out the rot. They thought if they took the woman away, the madness would leave with her. It was the greatest miscalculation in the history of the city. When the wagons carried Frau Troffea away to a mountain shrine, the magistrates of Strasbourg breathed a sigh of relief. They told the people, the curse is lifted. Go back to your homes. But they lied. The curse hadn't left. It had multiplied. What started with one pair of bleeding feet on a cobblestone street became a contagion that moved faster than any virus. It jumped from neighbor to neighbor, from father to son, from the healthy to the dying. Within days, the number didn't just double. It exploded. 30, then 100, then 400. 400 human beings, stripped of their free will, locked in a macabre trance, dancing until their hearts burst in their chests. The authorities tried to bury the true cause, blaming demons and stars. But the truth was far simpler and far more terrifying. The city itself had gone insane. This is the truth the king buried ... now ... Let the panic fade. Let the noise of the crowd dissolve into the soft hum of history. We are safe here, watching from behind the veil of time. The air is still. The light is dim and golden, filtering through the dust of centuries. Take a slow breath. Inhale the scent of old stone and dry summer earth. We are returning to the streets of Strasbourg. It is no longer just one street. It is the whole city. Let us walk among the gathering crowd and witness the moment the spark became a wildfire. For a brief moment, after they took Frau Trophia away, the city of Strasbourg fell silent. The wagon carrying her had rattled away towards the Vosges Mountains, disappearing into the heat haze of the horizon. The people stood on their doorsteps, wiping sweat from their brows. Looking at the empty spot on the street where she had danced for days, the cobblestones were stained dark. The echo of her wooden shoes seemed to linger in the air, a phantom rhythm that wouldn't fade. But physically, she was gone. The neighbors looked at one another with wary eyes. "It is over," they whispered. "God has shown mercy." But the air remained heavy. The heat did not break. The humidity wrapped around the city like a wet wool blanket, trapping the fear inside. In the silence of that afternoon, the people tried to return to their lives. A weaver sat back down at his loom. A mother tried to nurse her child. A blacksmith lifted his hammer. But their movements were slow, distracted. If you listened closely to the city in those hours, you would hear a strange tension. It was like the static in the air before a lightning strike. The minds of the people had been primed. They had watched the dance for too long. The image of the woman spinning and jerking was burned into their retinas. When they closed their eyes, they saw her. When they tried to sleep, they heard the clack, clack, clack of her shoes. The neural pathways had been opened. The suggestion had been planted. The city was a collective organism, and the organism was already infected. It was only a matter of time before the symptoms appeared. Elsewhere, and it didn't take long. It began again on a Tuesday evening. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the market square. A man named Johannes was walking home. We know little of him, only that he was a guild member, a man of respectability. He was tired. His belly was empty, gnawing at him with the familiar ache of the famine. He walked with his head down, watching his feet move over the stones, left, right. Suddenly he stopped. A tremor ran through his leg. It started in the calf muscle, a violent twitch that he couldn't control. He reached down to rub it, thinking it was a cramp from the heat. But the muscle was hard as rock. The twitch moved up, into his thigh, into his hip. Johannes looked around, fear widening his eyes. He tried to take a step toward his door, but his leg did not obey. Instead of stepping forward, his leg kicked out to the side. A sharp, jerky movement. He gasped. He grabbed onto the wall of a nearby house to steady himself. The rough plaster scraped his palms. He tried to plant his feet firmly on the ground, to root himself like a tree. "Stop," he whispered. "Stop," but his other leg lifted. A hop, dot, then a spin. He released the wall. His arms floated up, stiff and awkward, as if pulled by invisible wires attached to the sky. He began to turn in a slow, clumsy circle. His face was a mask of confusion and terror. He did not want to dance. He wanted to go home. He wanted to sleep, but the rhythm had him. It had crawled out of the subconscious of the city and taken root in his spine. A neighbor saw him. Then another. They didn't laugh this time. They didn't ask if he was drunk. They knew. They saw the same blank stare that Frau Trophia had worn. They saw the same relentless, mechanical movement. The silence of the evening was broken by the sound of his boots scuffing the dirt. Scuff, scuff, turn. The dam had cracked. By the next morning. Johannes was not alone. The infection moved with terrifying speed. It was not a biological virus spread by a cough or a touch. It was a psychological contagion spread by sight, by fear, by the shared belief in the curse. 3 more people joined him before noon. A washerwoman, her hands red and raw from the lye soap. She dropped her basket of linens in the mud and began to stomp her feet, her heavy skirt swirling around her. A young boy, no older than 12, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't understand, hopping on one foot and then the other. An old man, leaning on a cane, who threw his support aside and began to shuffle with a vitality that should have been impossible for his age. By the evening of the 3rd day, there were 30 people. It is a small crowd, but enough to block a street. Enough to create a noise that can be heard for blocks. Imagine the sound. It was no longer a lonely tapping. It was a cacophony. 30 pairs of wooden shoes, leather boots, and bare feet pounding against the hard earth. It sounded like a chaotic drum circle. There was no music, yet they all seemed to move to a shared internal pulse. A dissonance of motion. They did not dance together. They did not hold pairs. This was not a social event. Each person was trapped in their own private bubble of compulsion. They bumped into each other, bruising shoulders and stepping on toes, but they did not stop to apologize. They did not even seem to notice the collision. They simply bounced off one, another, and continued their spinning. The authorities were paralyzed. The city council met in the town hall, the heavy wooden doors barred against the noise outside. They looked at the reports. 34, the clerk read. Wait, a new report. 41. The numbers were rising every hour. The contagion was exponential. For every person who started dancing, 10 people watched. And of those 10 watchers, the fear would take hold of 1 or 2, and soon they would step into the circle. It was a whirlpool, sucking the sanity out of the city. Let us walk into the center of this growing storm. Let us describe what it felt like to stand on the Rue des Serruriers as the crowd swelled to 100. The first thing you would notice is the heat, the body heat. 100 bodies, moving violently in the height of summer, generate an immense amount of thermal energy. Walking near the dancers felt like opening the door of a furnace. The air was thick and wet, the smell. There was no plumbing, no deodorants, no daily baths. The scent of 100 sweating, terrified, starving bodies was overwhelming. It was the sour smell of stress sweat, mixed with the metallic tang of blood from blistered feet and the dust kicked up from the street. It hung in the alleyways, a physical cloud that you could taste on your tongue, and the dust. The constant pounding of feet pulverized the dried mud and filth between the cobblestones. A fine, yellow-gray mist rose up around the dancers, reaching to their waists. In the harsh midday sun, this dust cloud glowed, giving the scene a ghostly, surreal quality. The dancers looked like they were fading away, dissolving into the earth. The sound was a relentless, rhythmic thudding. Thud, 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 thud. It vibrated in the chest of anyone standing nearby. It rattled the windows and the frames. It was a sound that buried itself in the ears and refused to leave. And amidst the thudding there were other sounds, the sounds of human distress. These people were not silent. Some were weeping, low, continuous sobs that jagged out of them with every breath. Some were praying, Jesu dot dot dot, Jesu dot dot dot, Jesu dot dot dot, repeated over and over, a mantra to the rhythm of their feet. Some were screaming, sharp, sudden cries of pain as a muscle tore or a bone fractured. But even when they screamed, they did not stop. They could not. The signal from the brain to the legs was jammed. The command was, move. The pain was irrelevant. As the number climbed past 200, something changed in the nature of the crowd. At 30, they were individuals. You could see the baker, the smith, the mother. At 200, they became a mass. A single, writhing entity. This is the terror of the mob. The individual features began to blur. Faces became unrecognizable, distorted by exhaustion and dehydration. The eyes rolled back, showing the whites. The jaws hung slack. They all began to look the same, like hollow shells. Vacated by the souls that once inhabited them, they were no longer citizens of Strasbourg. They were the plague made flesh. To watch them was to look into a mirror of human fragility. The people watching from the sidelines, the ones who had not yet been taken, felt a strange pull. It is a phenomenon known to psychologists today. Mass psychogenic illness, when you see a group acting in unison. Deep parts of the primate brain are activated. The urge to mimic, the urge to belong, the urge to synchronize. Standing on the edge of the crowd, you would feel your own foot tapping. You would feel a strange energy building in your chest. You would wonder, why am I standing still? The whole world is moving. I should move too. It took immense willpower to look away. It took immense strength to walk past the square and not be drawn into the vortex. By the end of the week, the count reached 400 people. Imagine a modern cinema hall filled to capacity. Now imagine every single person standing up and dancing violently. Without music, for days on end, the streets of Strasbourg were clogged. The main arteries of the city were blocked by this wall of humanity. Carts could not pass. Business ground to a halt. The city was paralyzed by its own citizens. The dancers were in various stages of decay. The ones who had just started were still moving with energy, their jumps high, their spins fast. The ones who had been dancing for days were barely moving. They were shuffling, dragging their feet, swaying dangerously like trees in a storm. They were emaciated, their bodies burning through muscle and fat reserves they didn't have. They were skeletons in rags, held up only by the mysterious force of the mania. Some had collapsed. They lay on the ground, twitching, their legs still kicking in the dust even as they drifted into unconsciousness. But others simply stepped over them. The dance did not stop for the fallen. The noise was now a roar, a drone that could be heard from the city walls. It was the sound of a society unraveling. The priest walked along the edges of the crowd, splashing holy water. The water evaporated instantly on the hot skin of the dancers. The Latin prayers were lost in the thudding of feet. Exorcismus te ... But the demons did not listen, because they were not demons. They were neurons and nerves, fired by starvation and fear. Caught in a loop that had no end, the city council looked out at the chaos. 400 people, the heart of their city. They realized that prayer was not working. They realized that ignoring it was not working. Panic began to set in amongst the powerful. If this continued, there would be no city left to rule. They needed an answer. They needed a solution. And in their desperation, they turned to the only thing they understood, the devil. They decided that this was not a sickness of the body, but a battle for the soul. And if the devil was making them dance, then perhaps they just hadn't danced enough. The council was about to make a decision that would turn a tragedy into a massacre. They were about to build a stage when medicine failed and when logic crumbled. The people of Strasbourg turned their eyes to the darkness. They stopped looking at the bleeding feet of the dancers and started looking at their souls. To the modern mind, this was a medical crisis. But to the medieval mind, this was a battlefield. They believed that the air itself was thick with demons, that invisible claws were pulling the strings of the living. The church whispered that this was not a sickness, but a judgment. They told the terrified families that their loved ones weren't just dying, they were being dragged to hell while still alive. It was the ultimate psychological weapon. The fear wasn't of death. It was of something eternal. They convinced a starving city that their hunger was a sin and their madness was a punishment. In doing so, they poured gasoline on the fire. They didn't fight the plague. They sanctified it. This is the truth the king buried ... now ... Let the shadows lengthen. Let the harsh light of the summer sun fade away into the cool, dark comfort of the evening. We are leaving the noisy streets behind. We are stepping through the heavy oak doors of history into a place of silence and stone. Imagine you are standing in the nave of a great cathedral. The air here is different. It is cool, smelling of ancient incense, beeswax, and damp stone. The outside world is far away. Here, in the flickering candlelight, we will explore the mind of the past. We will understand the fear that gripped them, not with judgment, but with a quiet, observant peace. To understand why the dancing plague terrified them so deeply. We must first close our eyes and reimagine the universe as they saw it in 1589. The world was not a place of atoms and molecules. It was a place of spirits and symbols. The boundary between the natural and the supernatural was paper thin. In fact, for the people of Strasbourg, there was no boundary at all. Imagine waking up every morning believing that the world was a stage for a cosmic war. On one side, the angels. On the other, the demons. And you, a fragile human being, were standing right in the middle. Every sudden wind that slammed a door could be a spirit. Every shadow that moved in the corner of the room could be a watcher. When the milk soured overnight, it wasn't bacteria. It was a hex. When a child fell ill, it wasn't a virus. It was a curse. This was a world of magical thinking. It was a terrifying world, yes, but it was also a world filled with meaning. Nothing happened by accident. Every event was a message. So, when 400 people began to dance without music, the people did not look for a biological cause. They looked up. They looked to the heavens. They saw the chaos in the streets, and their minds immediately went to the only explanation that made sense: possession. They believed that the dancers had lost control of their own limbs because something else had taken the wheel. Imagine the horror of that thought. To believe that your own body could be hijacked. To believe that you could be a prisoner in your own skin. This was the fear that settled over the city like a heavy fog. It was a fear deeper than hunger. It was a fear for the integrity of the self. Let us walk into the Strasbourg Cathedral during the height of the plague. The massive pink sandstone walls rise up, disappearing into the gloom above. The stained glass windows invoke the stories of the saints in jewels of red, blue, and gold light. But down here on the floor it is dark. The church is crowded. Not with tourists, but with the desperate. The sound is a low, continuous murmur. It is the sound of thousands of prayers being whispered at once. Ave Maria, gratia plena. It sounds like the ocean washing over the stone pillars. The air is thick with smoke. Censers swing back and forth, releasing clouds of frankincense and myrrh. The smell is sweet, heavy, and intoxicating. It is designed to mask the smell of the unwashed crowd, but also to lift the soul. In the flickering light of thousands of beeswax candles, faces appear. They are gaunt, hollowed by famine. Tears stream down their soot-stained cheeks. They clutch rosary beads until their knuckles are white. They are afraid. They are looking at the statues of the saints, stone faces that look back with blank, serene expressions. They are begging for intervention. Protect us, they whisper. Build a wall around our souls. The fear of the devil was a physical sensation. It was a cold spot in the center of the chest. It was the hair standing up on the back of the neck. In the medieval mind, Satan was not a metaphor. He was a lion prowling the streets, looking for someone to devour. And in the dancing crowd, they believed he had found his feast. But it wasn't just the devil they feared. There was another name on their lips, a name spoken with a mixture of love and terror. Saint Vitus. In the complex hierarchy of medieval belief, saints were not just benevolent helpers. They were powerful, sometimes vengeful, patrons. Saint Vitus was a young martyr from Sicily who died centuries before. He was the patron saint of dancers, of actors, and of epileptics. The people believed that Saint Vitus had the power to cure the shaking sickness. But they also believed, and this is crucial, that he had the power to inflict it if you angered him. If you did not show him enough respect, he would send the Chorea Sancti Viti, the dance of Saint Vitus. As the people watched their neighbors twitch and spin, they didn't just see a random tragedy. They saw divine punishment. They believed that Saint Vitus was angry. Why was he angry? Perhaps it was the greed of the merchants. Perhaps it was the vanity of the youth. Perhaps it was simply that they hadn't lit enough candles. This belief added a layer of crushing guilt to the fear. The dancers weren't just victims. In the eyes of the city, they were sinners being chastised. And for those watching, the question was, am I next? Have I sinned enough to deserve the dance? This psychological pressure is immense. Imagine walking down the street, trying to keep your thoughts pure, trying to suppress any urge to move, terrified that one wrong thought would trigger the curse. The fear itself became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more they worried about losing control, the more fragile their control became. To fight a spiritual war, you need spiritual weapons. The priests of Strasbourg mobilized. They did not bring medicine. They brought holy water. They brought crosses of iron and wood. They brought the relics of the saints, shards of bone and scraps of cloth encased in gold. They walked among the dancers, weaving through the chaotic, thrashing limbs. The contrast was stark. The dancers were wild, sweaty, their clothes torn, their eyes rolling. The priests were solemn, dressed in heavy robes, chanting in Latin, Exorcemus te, omnis immundus SPI, R8US ... We exorcise you, every unclean spirit ... They sprinkled holy water on the fevered brows of the dancers. The water splashed onto the hot, dry skin. But the dancing did not stop. If anything, it grew worse. When a person in a trance state sees a priest, when they hear the words of exorcism, it confirms their delusion. It tells them, yes, you are possessed. Yes, this is real. The rituals intended to calm the city only heightened the hysteria. The smell of the incense, the ringing of the bells, the chanting, it all added to the sensory overload. It deepened the trance. The people watching crossed themselves furiously. They painted small crosses on their doorposts with oil or lamb's blood, echoing the Passover of ancient times. They wore amulets of red coral to ward off the evil eye. The city became a fortress of superstition. Every door was barred not just against thieves, but against the invisible spirits that rode on the heat waves. Let us drift deeper into the night. The sun has set, but the fear remains in the quiet of the homes. The fear took a different shape. It wasn't the panic of the crowd. It was the silent terror of the insomnia, lying in the dark, listening to the distant thumping of feet that never stopped. The people of Strasbourg questioned their own sanity. In the dark, the mind plays tricks. You feel a twitch in your leg. Is it a muscle spasm from walking all day? Or is it him? Is it the saint? Is it the devil? You hold your breath. You grab your leg with your hands, digging your fingers into the flesh, commanding it to be still. Be still, be still, but the more you focus on it, the more it twitches. The power of suggestion is a ghost that lives in the machinery of the brain. They believed that the soul was a physical thing, housed inside the body like a bird in a cage. They feared that if they danced, the cage would break, and the bird would fly away, leaving them empty. This is a fear that we, in the modern world, have largely forgotten. The fear of losing oneself. The fear of being erased. In 1518, this fear was as real as the stone of the cathedral. It sat on their chests while they slept. It walked beside them in the market. It was the shadow that would not leave. Days turned into a week. The prayers had been said. The candles had been burned down to pools of wax. The holy water had dried on the stones, and yet the number of dancers kept rising. The priests looked at their crosses, confused. The people looked at the sky, abandoned. If the church could not stop this, who could? The fear of the devil had failed to explain the tragedy, and the weapons of the spirit had failed to stop it. The city council realized that faith alone would not save Strasbourg. They needed to take action. They needed a new plan, and so they turned away from the priests and turned toward the physicians. But the advice the doctors would give and the decision the council would make would not bring peace. It would bring a new kind of horror. They were about to try to cure the dance. With more dancing, it is often said that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. In the history of Strasbourg, never was this proverb more deadly. Confronted with a plague that defied God and nature, the 21 men who ruled the city made a decision that stands as one of the most catastrophic medical blunders of all time. They didn't lock the dancers away. They didn't restrain them. Instead, they did the unthinkable. Based on the flawed science of the day, they decided that the cure for the dancing ... was more dancing. They ordered the carpenters to build a stage. They ordered the Guild of Musicians to bring their drums and pipes. They believed they were sweating out a fever. In reality, they were constructing a machine of exhaustion. With a single stroke of a quill on parchment, the city council transformed a public health crisis into a massacre. They signed a decree that forced the dying to keep moving until their hearts exploded. This is the truth the king buried ... now ... Let us leave the blinding sun of the street for a moment. Let us step out of the heat and into the cool, dark corridors of power. Imagine heavy oak doors closing behind us, shutting out the roar of the crowd. We are entering the Palz, the town hall of Strasbourg. The air here smells of sealing wax, dry ink, and centuries of dust. The room is dim, lit only by narrow windows. Here, sitting around a heavy wooden table, are the men who hold the fate of the city in their hands. Let us pull up a chair in the shadows and listen to their debate. The Council of 21, the Magistrat. These were the most powerful men in Strasbourg. Wealthy merchants, guild masters, aristocrats, men who were used to order, men who believed that every problem had a solution that could be written down in a ledger. But on this day in July 1518, the atmosphere in the council chamber is not one of confidence. It is one of palpable anxiety. Look at their faces in the dim light. They are sweating under their heavy velvet robes. They fan themselves with folded papers. The heat of the summer has penetrated even these thick stone walls. But the sweat on their brows is not just from the temperature. It is from fear. Outside, the city is unraveling. The reports pile up on the table in front of them. 50 new cases today. The market is blocked. The priests are failing. They are men of logic in a world gone mad. They tap their fingers on the wood, tap, tap, tap. They speak in hushed tones, their voices echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. They know that if they do not act, the Holy Roman Emperor himself might intervene. They need to regain control, but how do you legislate a trance? How do you arrest a movement? They realize that the spiritual approach has failed. The prayers have done nothing. And so, in this quiet, dusty room, they make a pivot. They decide to turn away from the church and turn towards science. They call for the physicians. The doors open and the doctors enter. These are learned men. They have studied at the great universities of Heidelberg and Paris. They wear long, dark robes and carry the weight of authority. But we must remember, the medicine of 1518 was not the medicine of today. It was a mix of philosophy, astrology, and the ancient Greek theories of Galen. They believed the human body was a container of 4 fluids, or humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a balance of these 4. Sickness was an imbalance. The council asked them the question that has been haunting the city: is this the work of the devil? The doctors consult their texts. They whisper amongst themselves. And then they deliver a verdict that changes everything. No, they say, this is not the work of demons. This is a natural disease. This was a radical thought. By ruling out the supernatural, they claimed the problem was biological. They called it hot blood. They theorized that the intense heat of the summer had boiled the blood of the victims. The brain, overheated by this boiling blood, was sending chaotic signals to the limbs. The body, they argued, was trying to cool itself down. It was trying to expel the excess heat through movement. It sounded logical. It sounded scientific. It gave the council something they desperately wanted, a physical cause that could be managed, but the doctors made a fatal error in their prescription. Following the logic of hot blood, they believed that you could not stop the process. If you stopped a person from dancing, the boiling blood would have nowhere to go and the brain would cook. Let them dance, the doctors advised. They must dance until the bad blood is sweated out. They must dance until they are free. Consider the tragedy of this logic, the councilman nodded. It made sense to them. If a man has a fever, you let him sweat. If a man has eaten poison, you let him vomit. If a man needs to dance, you help him dance. They believed they were being benevolent. They believed they were facilitating a cure. They did not see the dancers as dying people. They saw them as patients undergoing a vigorous treatment, and so the plan was hatched. A plan that was methodical, organized, and completely wrong. They would not just allow the dancing. They would encourage it. They would streamline it. They would take this chaotic mob and turn it into an organized event. The scribes dipped their quills into the inkwells, scratch, dot, 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 scratch, dot, 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 scratch, the sound of bureaucracy at work. The decree was written on heavy parchment. Item, the dancers shall be gathered in one place. Item, the Guild of Carpenters shall erect a platform. Item, the ban on music shall be lifted. They stamped the wax with the seal of the city. A stamp of red wax that looked like a drop of blood? The decision was made. The order was given. The council leaned back in their chairs, satisfied. They had taken action. They had applied reason to chaos that they had no idea that they had just ordered the construction of a death machine the next morning. The sound of the city changed. Amidst the thudding of feet and the wailing of the afflicted, a new sound emerged. The sound of hammers. Bang, dot, 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 bang, dot, dot, dong, dot. The carpenters arrived at the horse market, the Rosmarkt. They brought cartloads of timber. They brought saws and nails. These were men who usually built houses or stalls for the fair. Now they were building a dance floor. Imagine the scene. The sun is beating down. The carpenters are shirtless, sweating as they drive the nails into the fresh wood. The smell of sawdust mixes with the smell of the plague. It must have felt surreal to them. Building a stage for a performance that no one wanted to see. A stage for actors who did not know their lines. They built a raised wooden platform, sturdy and wide. They smoothed the planks so the dancers wouldn't trip. They erected railings to keep them from falling off. It was a professional job. The citizens watched the construction with confusion. Was this a festival? Was this a celebration? Why was the council building a ballroom in the middle of a funeral? But the council's logic was strict. If the dancers needed to move to survive, they needed a proper surface. The cobblestones were uneven. They were tearing up the feet of the victims. Wood was softer. Wood was safer, or so they thought. In reality, by moving them to a stage, they were putting them on display. They were turning the sufferers into a spectacle. And by concentrating them in one place, they were ensuring that the contagion of the mind would only grow stronger. But the stage was not the worst part of the council's plan, the doctors had said. They must dance it out. And the council thought, how do we help them dance? How do we keep them moving when they are tired? The answer was music. They hired musicians. Professional pipers and drummers were paid from the city treasury to come to the market. They were given a simple instruction: play and do not stop. Usually music is a gift. It is a source of joy, of relaxation. It signals a wedding, a feast, a holiday. But here, the music was weaponized. Imagine the first notes floating through the hot, stagnant air. The high, piercing trill of a flute. The deep, rhythmic thud of a drum. To the dancers, who were already trapped in a trance, the music acted like a drug. It synchronized them. Before the music, they were dancing to their own internal, chaotic rhythms. They were stumbling, stopping, starting. But when the drum began dash boom boom, boom, their bodies locked onto the beat. The brain creates a feedback loop with rhythm. It is a primal connection. Even when the conscious mind is screaming for rest, the motor cortex responds to the beat. The drum became a slave driver. It forced legs to lift. It forced feet to stomp. The musicians played lively tunes, folk songs, drinking songs, upbeat melodies meant for harvest festivals. The contrast was grotesque. The sound of joy overlaid on the sight of horror. The dancers on the stage were like puppets, and the musicians were pulling the strings. The music gave them a second wind, then a third. It pushed them past the point of exhaustion, past the point of pain, and into the realm of physiological collapse. The councilmen stood on the balcony of the town hall, looking down at their work. They saw the stage. They heard the music. They saw the people moving in unison. For a brief moment, they smiled. It looked like order. It looked like a cure, but as the hours wore on, the smile faded. The dancers did not stop. They did not sweat out the sickness and walk away healed. Instead, the tempo increased. The energy in the square grew darker, more frantic. The music didn't break the trance. It deepened it. It drew more people in from the side streets, attracted by the sound of the drums. The council had tried to extinguish a fire by pouring oil on it, and soon the wood of the new stage would be stained. Not with wine, but with the consequences of their fatal mistake. The cure was about to claim its first victims. In the annals of medical history, there are mistakes, and then there are catastrophes. What happened on the stage in Strasbourg was not a treatment. It was an execution disguised as a cure. The doctors looked at men and women whose hearts were racing at 200 beats per minute, whose feet were shredded to the bone, and they gave the most lethal advice imaginable. Keep going. They believed they could flush the disease out with sweat. But you cannot cure a fire by adding more fuel. By forcing the exhausted to dance, by hiring musicians to keep the rhythm going, the authorities didn't break the fever, they broke the people. They took a psychological trance and turned it into a physical death march. The cure was not an antidote. It was an accelerant. And as the tempo increased, the line between a hospital and a graveyard vanished completely. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the anger fade. Let the noise of the judgment quiet down. The past is unchangeable. We are here only to witness it, to understand it from the safety of the present. Imagine the lights dimming. The dust of the centuries settles back onto the floor. We are drifting back to the market square, but we are moving slowly, like a boat on a calm river. The air is thick with heat and the scent of summer dust. Let us observe the cure in action. To understand why they did it, we must step inside the mind of a medieval physician. We must look at the world through their eyes. They did not know about neurons or electrolytes. They viewed the body as a vessel of fluids, a delicate balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. To them, illness was merely a blockage. It was a stagnation. Imagine a stagnant pond. To clean it, you must get the water moving. You must flush it out. The doctors believed that the victims of the dancing plague were suffering from hot blood. The sun had cooked them. The blood was boiling in their veins, bubbling with a toxic heat that was driving the brain into a frenzy. The logic followed a simple, tragic path. If the poison is in the blood, and the blood is hot, then the heat must be released. And how does the body release heat? Through sweat. Dance it out. It sounds almost modern, like a fitness mantra. But in 1518, it was a medical prescription. They believed that if the dancers could just maintain the movement for a few more days, the bad blood would evaporate through their pores, leaving them cool, cleansed, and sane. It was a seductive idea. It offered hope. It suggested that the suffering had a purpose, that the pain was just part of the healing process. The council clung to this idea. They didn't want to believe they were helpless. They wanted a procedure, and so the prescription was written. The treatment plan was set. The city would not stop the dance. It would facilitate it. They would create the perfect conditions for a massive, collective purging of the soul. And so the music began. Let us listen to the soundscape of the cure. It was not a chaotic noise. It was structured. It was rhythmic. The city hired the best pipers and drummers from the guilds. These were men who knew how to hold a beat. They stood on the edge of the wooden stage, their instruments gleaming in the sun. Boom, ta 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 ta. Drum is a powerful instrument. It speaks directly to the spine. It bypasses the conscious mind and talks to the muscles. When you are tired, when your legs feel like lead, a drum beat can lift you. It acts like an external heart. It provides the energy that your body lacks. For the dancers, who had been moving for days, the arrival of the music was like a drug. Their eyes were glazed, their faces slack with exhaustion. But when the drum kicked in, their bodies responded. Heads began to nod. Feet began to stomp. Left, right. Left, right. The music synchronized them. It turned a disorganized crowd of individuals into a single, undulating organism. They were no longer moving by their own will. They were riding the wave of the rhythm. To a watcher, it might have looked hypnotic. The swaying of hundreds of bodies. The dust rising in puffs with every stomp. It was a trance induced by sound, but this was the danger. The music masked the pain. It numbed the warning signals that the body sends to the brain. Signals that scream, stop, rest, lie down. The music drowned out those signals. It whispered, keep moving, follow the beat, don't stop. The stage itself became a character in the tragedy. The carpenters had built it strong. Heavy planks of oak and pine raised above the cobblestones of the horse market. Think of the sound of wooden shoes on a wooden stage. Clack. It is a hollow, resonant sound. It is louder than stone. It amplifies the movement. When 400 people stomp on a wooden platform, it creates a vibration. A low-frequency rumble that you can feel in your teeth. The dancers were trapped on this island of wood. The railings kept them in. The crowd watching from below kept them in. The music kept them in. They were on display. The stage transformed their suffering into a spectacle. The healthy citizens of Strasbourg gathered around to watch the treatment. They brought food. They brought wine. They watched the dancers spin and jerk like performers in a grotesque carnival. The sun beat down on the unshaded platform. There was no roof. The wood absorbed the heat, becoming hot to the touch. The air above the stage shimmered. For the dancers, the world had shrunk to this rectangle of planks. There was no past. There was no future. There was only the wood beneath their feet, the sun above their heads, and the relentless command of the drum dot step. Turn, hop, step, turn, hop dot. They were rats on a wheel, running towards a finish line that did not exist. The council had hoped that concentrating the dancers in one place would contain the plague. They were wrong. By building a stage, by hiring musicians, by creating a spectacle, they made the sickness more attractive. Imagine you are a peasant standing in the crowd. You are hungry. You are frightened. You believe the end of the world is coming. You see the dancers on the stage. They are the center of attention. The priests are praying for them. The musicians are playing for them. They seem to be in a state of ecstasy, removed from the misery of the famine and the music. The music pulls at you. You feel your own foot tapping. You feel the urge to join them. Why should I suffer here in silence? You think, I want to surrender too. I want to dance it out too. And so people climbed onto the stage. Healthy people. People who had shown no symptoms an hour before. They climbed the wooden steps and joined the throng. They gave themselves over to the rhythm. The cure was actually a recruitment drive. The music acted as a carrier signal for the mass hysteria. It broadcast the madness to everyone within earshot. The doctors watched in horror as the number of dancers grew. The stage became crowded. Bodies bumped against bodies. The smell of sweat and fear became a physical fog. The plan was backfiring in real time. Let us close our eyes and focus on the body. Let us understand what was happening inside the dancers as the days wore on. The human body is a miracle of endurance, but it has limits. When you dance for an hour, you are tired. When you dance for a day, you are in agony. When you dance for a week, you are dying. Consider the feet. The leather of the shoes had worn through. The wood of the sabots had rubbed the skin raw. The bones of the metatarsals were fracturing under the constant impact. But the trance blocked the pain. The endorphins and the adrenaline masked the injury. They were dancing on broken bones. Consider the blood. The doctors wanted the blood to cool down, but the constant exertion was heating it up. The internal body temperature was rising. 38 degrees, 39 degrees, 40 degrees. The dancers were cooking from the inside out. Their skin was dry and hot. They had stopped sweating because there was no water left in their bodies to give. Consider the heart. The heart is a pump. It has a rhythm, lube-dub, but the drumbeat on the stage was faster. The heart tried to keep up. It beat faster and faster. It was fluttering like a trapped bird against the rib cage. It was starving for oxygen. It was starving for rest, but the music did not stop. The pipers took shifts. When one was tired, another took his place. The music was eternal. The dancers were not. There comes a moment when the will can no longer sustain the flesh. A moment when the biological machine simply shuts down. It happened first to the old, then to the weak, then to the strong. A dancer would be spinning, their eyes fixed on the sun, and then, mid-step, the puppet strings would be cut. They would crumble. They did not fall like a person tripping. They fell like a sack of grain. Straight down, they hit the wooden planks with a heavy thud. The other dancers did not stop. They stepped over the fallen body. They danced around it. The rhythm was more important than the life. The doctors rushed forward. They felt for a pulse. Nothing. The heart had simply stopped. It had given up. They dragged the body off the stage. They laid it in the shadow of the market stalls. He is cured, a cynic might have whispered. He has stopped dancing, but on the stage the drum beat on. Boom, dot, 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 boom, one by one, they fell. The cure was working with brutal efficiency. It was clearing the stage, not by healing the sick, but by removing the living. The city council watched the bodies piling up in the shadows. They saw the blood staining the fresh wood of the stage. The realization hit them slowly, like a cold wind cutting through the summer heat. They had been wrong. The science was wrong. The music wasn't helping. It was killing. The Dance It Out decree would go down in history as a death sentence. But even as the first dozen bodies were carted away to the plague pits, a new group of people was arriving at the city gates. They were not doctors. They were not priests. They were the musicians who had heard the call, coming to join the deadliest concert in history. The rhythm was about to get louder, and the death toll was about to rise. It was the most expensive funeral march in history, paid for by the very people who were dying. When the city council realized that the silence of the dancers was terrifying, they decided to fill the air with noise. They opened the city treasury and hired professional musicians, pipers, drummers, and hornblowers to accompany the mania. They thought that if they gave the chaos a rhythm, they could control it. They thought the music would guide the afflicted out of their trance. Instead, they created a siren song. The music didn't cure the plague. It broadcast it. It turned a medical crisis into a carnival of horrors. The sound of the pipes drifted through the open windows of the city, pulling more souls into the street, binding them to the beat. The musicians played until their fingers bled, unaware that every note they struck was driving the dancers closer to the grave. This is the truth the king buried, now. Let the noise of the judgment fade. Let the harshness of the history books dissolve into the soft, golden light of the past. We are drifting back to the summer of 1518. The sun is high and heavy in the sky. The air is thick with dust. We are standing at the edge of the market square, waiting. Listen closely. Can you hear it? In the distance, the faint sound of a tuning instrument. The musicians are coming. Let us watch them arrive. They came from the guild halls. They came from the taverns. They were men of trade, professionals who were used to playing at weddings, at feast days, at the coronations of princes. They were not villains. They were simply men doing a job, hired by the magistrate to perform a public service. Imagine seeing them walk down the Rue des Serruriers. There are drummers with their heavy wooden drums strapped to their chests, the leather skins pulled tight and rubbed with oil. There are pipers carrying long wooden flutes and bagpipes made of sheepskin, the wood polished smooth by years of handling. There are viol players, their bows in hand, the horsehair strung tight. They walk with a sense of purpose. They wear the colorful tunics of their trade reds and yellows that stand out against the gray stone of the city. But if you look at their faces, you see confusion. Usually when they are hired, there is an air of celebration. There is laughter. There is the smell of roasting meat. Today the air smells of sickness. The streets are lined with silent, staring people. The musicians exchange glances. They adjust their caps. They moisten their lips. They are nervous. They have been told that their music is a medicine. They have been told that they are there to help the sick sweat out the fever. But as they approach the horse market, as they see the wooden stage rising out of the dust, and the writhing mass of humanity upon it, they must have hesitated. The stage is already vibrating with the impact of hundreds of feet. The sound is a dull, chaotic roar, thud, thud, gasp, cry, the musicians step up onto the designated platform. The wood creaks under their weight. They are now part of the machine. They are the engine that will drive the tragedy forward. Let us pause for a moment and consider the tools of their trade. The soundscape of the 16th century was different from ours. It was raw. It was more visceral. First, pipe and tabor. This was a common combination. The musician would hold a 3-holed flute in one hand and beat a small drum hanging from his wrist with the other. The sound of the pipe is high, piercing, and shrill. It cuts through the air like a bird's cry. In the heat of the square, that high pitch would have felt sharp, almost painful to the ear. Then the bagpipes. These were not the Highland pipes of Scotland, but the softer, buzzing pipes of Central Europe. They produce a constant drone-a-low, humming vibration that never stops. This drone is hypnotic. It creates a floor of sound for the melody to dance upon. It gets inside the head. It vibrates the skull. For a person in a trance, that constant drone acts like a tether, keeping them locked in the mental state. And finally, the drums, big, deep field drums. The heads were made of calfskin. When struck with a wooden stick, they didn't just make a noise. They moved the air. Boom, you could feel it in your chest. Boom, you could feel it in the solace of your feet. These instruments were designed for open-air festivals. They were designed to be loud, to reach the back of the crowd. Now focused on a small stage, their power was concentrated. They were about to create a wall of sound that would box the dancers in. The musicians began to tune. The screech of a pipe being adjusted. The tightening of a drum key. The discordant notes floated over the heads of the exhausted dancers. A prelude to the marathon that was about to begin. The leader of the musicians, perhaps a master of the guild, lifted his hand. The crowd fell silent. The city council watched from the balcony. Even the dancers seemed to pause for a fraction of a second, their bodies swaying in the heat. The hand dropped, and the music began. It was not a somber tune. The council had ordered lively music. They wanted the blood to move. So the musicians played a Galliard-a-fast, energetic dance in triple time. Da-da-da. The sound exploded across the square. It bounced off the stone walls of the houses. It rang in the eaves of the rooftops. And immediately the chaos on the stage changed. Before the music, the stamping was irregular. It was the sound of rain falling on a roof. But now, the stamping synchronized. The dancers, trapped in their neurological loop, latched onto the beat. Their feet hit the wood at the exact same moment. Crack. The sound of 400 wooden shoes. Hitting oak planks in unison is like a gunshot. Crack, crack, crack. The musicians must have been startled. They played louder to be heard over the stamping. The pipers blew harder, their cheeks puffing out, their faces turning red. The drummers swung their arms with more force. A feedback loop was established. The louder the music, the harder the stomp. The harder the stomp, the louder they played. The air in the square began to vibrate with a terrifying energy. It was no longer a hospital ward. It was a factory of rhythm. There is a strange power in repetition. When a sound is repeated over and over, the brain stops processing it as information and starts accepting it as reality. The musicians played the same tunes over and over again. They had a limited repertoire. A folk song about the harvest. A song about a maiden in a garden. A song about a soldier returning home. Round and round the melodies went. High note, low note, drum beat. High note, low note, drum beat. For the listener lying in bed tonight, imagine that sound. A constant rhythmic weaving. It wraps around you. It numbs the thoughts. For the dancers, it was a cage. They could not stop moving as long as the music played. And the music did not stop. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows shifted from left to right, but the sound remained constant. The musicians grew tired. Sweat poured down their faces, stinging their eyes. Their lips cracked from blowing into the reeds. Their wrists ached from the drumming, but they were paid to play. And the council was watching, so they swapped. When one piper needed to drink, another stepped in. The drone of the bagpipes never ceased. The music became a physical substance. It filled every corner of the square. It seeped into the wood of the stage. It soaked into the clothes of the dancers. It was a thick auditory syrup that slowed time down. Hours turned into an eternity. The separation between the dancer and the music vanished. They were the same thing. The man was the drum. The woman was the flute. They were notes on a page written by a madman. Let us step down from the stage and stand in the crowd. The arrival of the musicians had changed the atmosphere of the city. Before, it was a tragedy. Now it looked like a festival. Hearing the music, people came out of their houses. They came from the tannery district, from the docks, from the rich quarters. They gathered around the stage. The sheer spectacle of it was mesmerizing. Imagine the contrast. On the stage, agony. Gaunt faces, rolling eyes, bloody feet, collapsing bodies. In the air, joyful music. Bright, happy, major key melodies meant for weddings. The onlookers didn't know how to react. Some tapped their feet. Some hummed along. The cognitive dissonance was profound. Merchants moved through the crowd selling watered-down wine and warm pretzels. It became a grotesque social event. The dance of death had become the concert of the summer. But underneath the music, if you listened closely, you could hear the truth. You could hear the gasping breath of the dancers. You could hear the low groans of pain when the music paused for a beat. You could hear the wood of the stage splintering under the abuse. The musicians, from their vantage point, saw it all. They looked down into the eyes of the people they were playing for. They saw the terror. They saw the plea for silence. But the drum beat on. Boom, boom. To stop playing would be to disobey the council. To stop playing would be to admit that there was no cure. Sound travels. It ignores walls. It ignores doors. The sound of the pipes drifted away from the market square. It traveled down the winding alleys. It floated over the river. It reached the ears of people sitting in their homes, trying to ignore the plague, and this is where the tragedy deepened. The music didn't just keep the current dancers moving. It called to the others. The susceptible, the weak-minded, the fearful, sitting in a dark room, hungry and afraid. A woman hears the drum. Her heart begins to race. Her foot begins to twitch. The music offers an invitation. Come, it says. Come to the square. Join the movement. Lose yourself. The rhythm is infectious. It pulls at the primitive part of the brain. One by one, doors opened. One by one, new figures emerged from the shadows. They walked toward the sound like moths flying toward a flame. They weren't running away from the stage. They were running to it. The musicians, unwittingly, were casting a net over the city. Every note they played drew the knot tighter. They saw new people climbing onto the stage. A baker still wearing his apron. A nun, her habit fluttering in the breeze. A child holding a doll. The stage grew crowded. The musicians had to step back. retreating to the very edge of the platform to avoid being trampled by the growing mob. The cure was attracting the disease. The sun began to set on the first day of the concert. The sky turned a bruised purple. But the music did not stop with the light. Torches were lit around the stage, casting long, dancing shadows against the cathedral walls. The musicians were exhausted, but they played on. The dancers were dying, but they danced on. The rhythm had taken total control. The brain was offline. Only the motor cortex remained active. But the human body is not a machine. It runs on energy, on water, on blood. And the tank was empty. The musicians were playing the soundtrack to a biological collapse. The rhythm of death was established. And soon the music would be interrupted not by silence, but by the sound of hearts failing. We often think of music as a healer. A lullaby to sleep, a hymn to pray, a ballad to cry. But in the summer of 1518, music became a weapon of mass destruction. The city council didn't realize it, but by ordering the drums to play without ceasing, they had built a sonic prison. The rhythm didn't set the dancers free. It locked them in. The human brain is hardwired to sync with a beat. When the drums began to pound in the market square, the dancers lost their last shred of autonomy. They became slaves to the tempo. Their hearts, already racing, were forced to match the frantic speed of the pipes. The cure became the killer. It was a symphony of exhaustion, a concert where the price of admission was your life. And as the sun went down, the music didn't stop. It only got louder, drowning out the sound of bodies hitting the floor. This is the truth the king buried ... now ... Let the panic fade. Let the harsh judgment of history dissolve into the mist. We are not here to fear the past, but to understand it. To feel the weight of the air on that long summer evening. Close your eyes. Imagine the darkness settling over the city of Strasbourg. The stars are hidden behind a veil of heat and dust. The only light comes from the torches burning around the square. And the only sound is the rhythm. Let us step into the circle and listen to the rhythm of death. To understand what happened next, we must listen to the drum. It was a large field drum made of hollowed wood and stretched calfskin. When the drummer struck it with his wooden mallet, it didn't just make a sound. It moved the air. Boom, a low-frequency wave that traveled across the wooden stage. Boom, a vibration that traveled up through the solace of the feet for the dancers, who were dehydrated, starving, and delirious. This sound became the entire world. The brain has a primitive section, the basal ganglia, which controls movement and rhythm. It is older than language. It is older than logic. When a beat is repetitive, loud, and constant, this part of the brain takes over. It bypasses the conscious will. You might want to stop. You might want to sit down, but when the drum hits boom, your leg muscles contract automatically. It is a reflex, like pulling your hand away from a fire. But here, the reflex was to stomp. The rhythm became a metronome for their survival. Inhale, exhale, step, stepified existence. There was no more hunger. There was no more thirst. There was only the next beat. The musicians played in 4/4 time. A marching beat. A dancing beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was hypnotic. It was comforting in a terrifying way. It removed the burden of choice. You didn't have to decide to move. The music moved you. You were a leaf caught in a rushing river, and the drum was the current. Let us visualize the air in the market square. Usually air is invisible. But that night the air was thick. It was thick with the dust rising from the stage of fine, yellow powder that coated the throat and the lungs. It was thick with the smoke from the pitch torches that hissed and sputtered on the poles. And it was thick with sound. Sound waves are physical pressure, with dozens of pipers and drummers playing at full volume, enclosed by the high stone walls of the surrounding guild halls. The square became an echo chamber. The sound bounced off the stone. It folded back on itself. It created a wall of sound. For the dancers on the stage, there was no escape. The sound pressed against their eardrums. It vibrated in their chest cavities. If you have ever stood next to a large speaker at a concert, you know the feeling. The bass enters your body. It shakes your ribs. Now, imagine feeling that for 10 hours straight, without water, without rest. In the sweltering heat of July, the sound became a physical weight. It pushed them down, and the rhythm pulled them up. Push down, pull up. Push down, pull up. The music became a tangible substance, a gelatinous sea that they were drowning in. The piper's melodies, high, shrill, piercing, cut through the heavy air like knives, keeping the nervous system in a state of high alert. There was no moment of silence, no moment of peace, just the relentless driving force of the song. What happens to the human mind under this kind of pressure? It escapes. The dancers were no longer in Strasbourg. They were no longer conscious of their blistered feet or their burning thirst. They had entered a dissociative trance. Psychologists call it a fugue state. The eyes remain open, but they do not see. The ears hear, but they do not interpret. If you looked into the eyes of a dancer that night, you would see a void. The pupils were blown wide, black discs swallowing the iris. They were staring at something far beyond the horizon. Perhaps they saw St. Vitus. Perhaps they saw the gates of heaven. Perhaps they saw nothing but a kaleidoscope of colors brought on by heat stroke. In this trance, time loses its meaning. 5 minutes feels like an hour feels like a second. The pain signals from the body are severed. The nerves scream, stop. But the brain has cut the phone line. This is the cruelty of the rhythm of death. It acted as an anesthetic. It numbed them to the damage they were doing to themselves. They danced on broken ankles. They danced with ruptured tendons. They danced as their kidneys failed. The music held them in a suspended animation. They were ghosts trapped in a machine of flesh, powered by the drum. Night fell completely. The city council ordered more light. They wanted to ensure the cure continued around the clock. Men with long poles lit the iron baskets filled with pitch and pine tar. Whoosh, orange flames leaped up into the darkness. The light was flickering, unstable. It cast long, dancing shadows against the cathedral walls. The shadows of the dancers stretched out, 20 feet tall, distorted and monstrous. The shadows danced on the stone, mimicking the tragedy on the stage. The scene took on a hellish quality. The smoke from the torches mixed with the dust, creating a red haze. The dancers moved through this haze like specters. Their sweat-soaked clothes clung to their bodies. Their faces, illuminated by the firelight, looked like skulls. The musicians, too, looked demonic in the flickering light. Their cheeks puffed out as they blew into the pipes, their arms rising and falling with the drumsticks. From a distance, it looked like a ritual. It looked like a summoning. The citizens watching from the windows crossed themselves. The spectacle had shifted from a medical procedure to something ancient and terrifying. The rhythm seemed to be pulsing from the earth itself, as if the heart of the city had gone rogue. The contrast was absolute. The lively, happy folk music played against a backdrop of fire and shadow. A major key melody for a minor key reality, and what of the men making the music? Let us not forget the pipers and the drummers. They were victims too, in their own way. They had been playing for hours. Their lips were cracked and bleeding. Their fingers were cramping into claws. Their shoulders burned from the weight of the drums. But they were afraid to stop. They saw what was happening on the stage. They saw the dancers foaming at the mouth. They saw the way they stumbled and jerked. They knew, deep down, that this was wrong. They knew that their music was fueling the fire, but the magistrate stood nearby, watching. The crowd was watching. And there was a superstitious fear that if the music stopped suddenly, the shock might kill the dancers. Or worse, that the demons would be released into the crowd dot, so they played on. They played through their own exhaustion. They entered their own kind of trance, blow, breath, finger, note, strike, lift, strike, lift. They became automatons. They detached themselves from the reality of what they were doing. They focused only on the sheet music, only on the melody. Keep the beat, they told themselves. And just keep the beat. They were the engine of the machine, grinding the dancers down, note by note, measure by measure dot, and then the inevitable happened. The human heart is a pump. It is a muscle. It can only beat so fast for so long. Before the chemistry fails, under the influence of the rhythm, the dancers' heart rates had been elevated for days. 180 beats per minute, 200 beats per minute. The blood became thick with dehydration. The electrolytes sodium, potassium were sweated away. The electrical signals that control the heart began to misfire. It didn't happen to everyone at once. It happened sporadically. A young man spinning in the center of the stage. The drum hit boom. He took a step. And then silence inside his chest. The heart fluttered, quivered, and stopped. He didn't cry out. He simply folded. Gravity reclaimed him. He fell amidst the stamping feet of his neighbors, but the rhythm did not stop for him. The other dancers, locked in their trance, did not look down. They did not pause to check on him. Their brains were locked onto the beat, left, right, right. They stepped over his body as if it were a log in the road. Then a woman fell. Then an old man. The stage began to look like a battlefield. The living danced among the dead. The rhythm of the drum had become the rhythm of death, quite literally. It was counting down the seconds until the next collapse. The musicians saw them fall. The council saw them fall. The terrifying realization finally washed over the city. The cure was lethal. The music was not driving the demons out. It was driving the life out, but stopping a runaway train is not easy. You cannot simply silence the drums and expect the nightmare to end. The momentum was too great. The damage to the bodies was already done, as the bodies were dragged off the stage by grim-faced guards. The people of Strasbourg saw the true cost of their superstition. The feet that trailed in the dust were no longer dancing. They were broken, bloody, and still. The rhythm would eventually fade, but the scars on the city would remain. And for those who survived the night, the agony was just beginning. The dance was over, but the pain was about to wake up. For centuries, historians and priests looked to the sky for answers. They blamed the alignment of the planets. They blamed the wrath of an angry saint. They blamed the corruption of the human soul. But the truth of the dancing plague wasn't written in the stars, and it wasn't hiding in the shadows of the church. It was hiding in the most innocent place imaginable, the dinner table. While the city prayed for deliverance, the killer was sitting right in front of them, baked into the dark. Heavy loaves of bread they fought to survive on. The evidence suggests that the people of Strasbourg weren't possessed by demons. They were being slowly, systematically poisoned by their own food. A microscopic fungus, invisible to the naked eye, had turned their daily bread into a weapon of mass hallucination. They didn't need an exorcist. They needed a chemist. This is the truth the king buried ... now ... Let the noise of the market square fade away. Let the drums fall silent. The frantic energy of the dance is over, leaving only the quiet questions of history. Imagine we are leaving the heat of the sun and stepping into a cool, dimly lit room. The air smells of old paper, dried ink, and dust. We are entering the archives. Here, in the stillness, we will look through the microscope of time. We will sift through the evidence, piece by piece, to understand the mystery of the mind and the body. To find the root of the madness, we must leave the city walls. We must float over the stone ramparts across the moat and out into the countryside of Alsace. Imagine the fields of 1518. The harvest had been poor, but the rye was still growing. Rye is a tough grain. It survives where wheat dies. It stands tall in the damp, cold soil. But that year, the weather had been strange. A wet, humid spring followed by a scorching summer. These are the perfect conditions for a silent invader. If you were to walk through those fields, running your hand along the stalks of grain, you might have noticed something. Among the golden kernels, there were dark, hard spurs. They looked like oversized seeds, curved and black, resembling the spur of a rooster's claw. The farmers knew it. They called it Wolf's tooth. They didn't know it was alive. They didn't know it was a fungus. They simply thought it was a part of the plant, perhaps a little deformed by the weather. So, when the harvest came, they cut the rye. Scythes swinging in the sun, swish, swish, they gathered the stalks. They threshed the grain. The golden kernels and the black spurs were mixed together. They took it to the mill. The heavy stones ground it all down into a fine gray flour, and then it was baked. The ovens of Strasbourg burned hot. The smell of baking bread drifted through the starving city. It was the smell of life. But inside that bread, the chemical structure of the fungus remained intact. The scientific name is Claviceps purpurea. We know it today as ergot. And ergot is a key. It is a chemical key that fits into the locks of the human brain. Let us consider what happens when this Wolf's tooth enters the body. It is a slow poison. It does not kill instantly. It transforms. Ergot is full of alkaloids. One of these alkaloids is lysergic acid. In the 20th century, scientists would synthesize this acid to create LSD, but in 1518, they were eating it raw, in small, concentrated doses, meal after meal. Imagine the effects. At first, it is subtle. A tingling in the fingers, a numbness in the toes. The chemicals cause the blood vessels to constrict. The veins tighten. The blood flow to the extremities slows down. The people called it St. Anthony's fire because it felt like their limbs were burning. Invisible flames licking at the skin, but the poison didn't stop at the hands and feet. It traveled up. It crossed the blood-brain barrier. It entered the command center of the mind. Ergot affects the neurotransmitters serotonin, dopamine. These are the chemicals that control mood, perception, and movement. When the balance is tipped, reality begins to dissolve. The world becomes brighter. Colors become more vivid. Sounds become louder. A dog barking in the distance sounds like a monster roaring. A shadow on the wall looks like a demon crouching. And the body feels strange energy. A buzzing. A need to move. It is a chemical agitation. The nervous system is misfiring. If you eat enough of it, you cannot sit still. Your muscles twitch. Your legs jerk. You feel as though you are being pulled by strings. This theory fits the nightmare perfectly. The burning feet. The hallucinations. The convulsions. The madness. It suggests that the dancing plague was actually a mass poisoning event. The entire city was tripping on a medieval hallucinogen, served to them on their own plates. It is a compelling answer. It wraps the mystery up in a neat scientific package. But history is rarely neat. As we look closer at the dusty records, there is a flaw in the ergot theory. A crack in the glass. Ergotism is a brutal physical disease. It restricts blood flow so severely that it often leads to gangrene. Fingers and toes turn black and fall off. It makes people weak. It makes them crawl, not dance. Could a person suffering from advanced ergot poisoning really dance for 6 days straight? Could they stomp and jump and spin? It seems unlikely. A poisoned body is a broken body. It collapses. It does not perform a marathon. And there is another problem. Ergotism usually affects households or neighborhoods who shared the same batch of flour. But the dancing plague was selective. It picked people from different streets, different families, and it spread by sight. People didn't catch it by eating. They caught it by watching. So, if it wasn't the bread, what was it? If the poison wasn't in the stomach, it must have been somewhere else. It must have been in the mind. Let us turn the page. Let us leave the chemistry behind and enter the realm of psychology. The human mind is a fortress. It protects us from the chaos of the world. It organizes reality into a story we can understand. But the walls of this fortress are not made of stone. They are made of belief. And under enough pressure, those walls can crumble. Strasbourg in 1518 was a pressure cooker. We have spoken of the heat, the hunger, the fear of God. Imagine living in a state of constant high-level terror. You believe your sins are killing the crops. You believe the devil is walking the streets. You are starving, which makes the brain weak and suggestible. In this state, the mind looks for an escape valve. It looks for a way to express the intolerable stress. And sometimes the mind creates a physical symptom to deal with the emotional pain. It is called mass psychogenic illness, or in the old language, mass hysteria. It is not fake. It is not acting. It is the power of the subconscious mind taking control of the body. The brain convinces the body that it must dance. It becomes a truth deeper than logic. How does a thought jump from one person to another? We are social creatures. We are wired to mimic. Deep in our brains, we have mirror neurons. When we see someone smile, we want to smile. When we see someone yawn, we yawn. Now, imagine the power of fear. You see Frau Trophia dancing? You see the look in her eyes, a mix of terror and ecstasy. Your mirror neurons fire. You feel the twitch in your own leg. If you truly believe that Saint Vitus has the power to curse you, then that belief becomes a reality. The fear itself acts as the pathogen. You are afraid of getting the dancing sickness. You monitor your body for signs. Is my leg shaking? Yes, it is shaking. Oh no, I have it. I must dance. And once you surrender to the belief, the trance takes over. The anxiety that has been building up for years is suddenly released in a flood of movement. It is a catharsis. It is a way for the body to scream when the mouth has no words left. The dancing plague was a collective nervous breakdown. It was a city screaming in unison. This is the hidden truth that is perhaps more terrifying than poison. Ergot is just a fungus. It can be killed. It can be avoided. But the mind? The mind is inescapable. The story of 1518 teaches us that we are the creators of our own reality. The people of Strasbourg danced because they believed they had to. They danced because their culture told them that demons were real, that saints were vengeful, and that the only way to cure a curse was to surrender to it. If they had lived in a different time, perhaps they would have fainted, or spoken in tongues, or had visions. But in their time, the script for madness was the dance, and so they followed the script. They played their parts until the curtain fell. It is a testament to the power of the human imagination. We can imagine things so vividly that they become physical. We can worry ourselves sick. We can believe ourselves to death. So was it the black spur in the rye? Or was it the shadow in the mind? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the poison weakened the door, and the hysteria kicked it open. As the weeks passed, the energy of the city began to fade. The dancers who survived were broken, empty shells. The music finally stopped. The stage was dismantled, but the echo of those footsteps would never truly leave the cobblestones of Strasbourg. The mystery remains, hovering in the dust of the archives, a reminder of a summer when the world went mad. But for now, the books are closed. The investigation is over. The candle is burning low. We have one last journey to take. We must see how it ended. We must see what was left when the silence finally returned. The end of the plague did not come with a bang, but with a whisper. After weeks of chaos, after the blood had dried on the wooden stage and the bodies had been carted away, a strange silence fell over Strasbourg. The authorities, ashamed of their fatal mistake, tried to erase the memory of the summer. They dismantled the stage in the dark of night. They banished the survivors to the shrine of St. Vitus in the mountains. They burned the records of the dead. They wanted the world to believe it was just a fever, a momentary madness. But you cannot bury a rhythm once it has been heard. The survivors returned to their homes, broken and hollow, carrying a secret in their bones. They never spoke of the dance again. But in the quiet moments, in the space between heartbeats, the city could still hear it. The echo of the drums remained, a ghostly reminder of the time when the human spirit broke under the weight of its own fear. This is the truth the king buried ... now ... The story is told. The fire has burned down to embers. The shouting of the crowd has faded into the wind. We are alone now, standing in the quiet aftermath of history. Take a deep breath. Let the tension of the story leave your body. We are drifting away from the heat of 1518, moving towards the cool, blue light of rest. Let us walk through the silent city one last time and find peace in the ending. How did it finally stop? It stopped when the city admitted defeat. The council realized the music was killing them. They realized the stage was a mistake. And so they did what they should have done in the beginning. They sent the dancers away. Imagine a line of wagons leaving the city gates. The wheels creak softly on the dirt road. The sun is setting, casting long purple shadows across the vineyards. Inside the wagons lie the survivors. They are gaunt, pale, and exhausted. Their feet are bandaged. Their eyes are closed. They are being taken to the shrine of St. Vitus, high in the Vosges mountains. As the wagons climb higher, the air changes. The stifling heat of the valley is left behind. The air becomes cool, crisp. It smells of pine needles and damp earth. The sounds of the city fade away. No more drums. No more screaming. No more bells. Only the sound of the wind in the trees. Whoosh, whoosh, and the sound of a mountain stream bubbling over gray stones. For the dancers, this silence was the true medicine. The red shoes were taken off. Their bruised feet were washed in the cold glacial water. They were laid down on simple straw mats in the cool stone sanctuary of the shrine. There, in the shadow of the mountain, the trance finally broke. The grip of the rhythm loosened. The brain, starved of stimulation, finally allowed the body to rest. They slept. For the first time in weeks, they slept a dreamless, heavy sleep. The nightmare was over. Back in Strasbourg, the city began the slow work of forgetting. The carpenters returned to the horse market. Silently, they pulled out the nails. Squeak, they lifted the heavy oak planks of the stage. They scrubbed the cobblestones, washing away the dust and the stains. Within a week, the square was empty again. The merchants returned. The farmers brought their vegetables. Life, with its stubborn persistence, resumed. People walked over the same stones where hundreds had danced themselves to death, and they did not look down. It is the nature of humanity to move on. To cover the scars with new skin, the heat wave eventually broke. The clouds gathered over the cathedral spire. Heavy, gray clouds, and finally the rain came. It was a gentle rain at first, and a downpour. It washed the roofs. It washed the streets. It washed the air. It cooled the fever of the city. The water ran through the gutters, carrying away the last debris of the tragedy. The summer of 1518 passed into autumn. The leaves turned gold and fell. The days grew shorter. The darkness returned, but this time it was a peaceful darkness. A darkness for sleeping. What became of the dancers? Some never returned. They were buried in the quiet earth of the mountain. But those who did return, they were changed. They walked softly. They spoke little. There was a look in their eyes at distance, as if they had seen something beyond the veil of this world. They did not speak of the dance. It became a taboo, a forbidden memory. If a child asked, "Grandfather, why do you limp?" the old man would simply look away and say, "It was a long summer." They carried the shame of their loss of control, but they also carried a strange, secret knowledge. They knew the power of the mind. They knew that reality is fragile. They knew that the boundary between the sane and the mad is only as thick as a heartbeat. They went back to their looms, their forges, their kitchens. But perhaps sometimes when a storm was coming or when a drum beat in the distance, they would feel a ghost of a twitch in their legs, a phantom rhythm, and they would stop. They would breathe, and they would command their bodies to be still. History is an echo chamber. Events happen and they pass, but the sound of them lingers. The dancing plague is gone. 500 years have passed. The wooden shoes have rotted away. The parchment decrees have turned to dust. The bones of the dancers have become part of the earth, but the story remains. Why does it haunt us? Why do we listen to it in the dark? Perhaps because it reminds us of our own vulnerability. We like to think we are in control. We like to think we are rational, but we are creatures of rhythm. We are creatures of belief. We are biological machines that can be hijacked by a song, by a fear, by a dream. The echo of the music is the echo of our own humanity. It is the sound of the heart beating against the ribs. Lube-dub, lube-dub. It is the oldest rhythm in the world. Tonight. As you lie here, safe and warm, you can hear that rhythm within yourself. It is not a frantic drum. It is a slow, steady pulse. A lullaby. Now. It is time to leave Strasbourg. It is time to leave the year 1518. Imagine you are standing in the archive room one last time. The candle is burning low. The wax is dripping. You close the heavy leather book. Thud, you run your hand over the cover. It is cool and smooth. You blow out the candle. Puffs, the room goes dark. A soft, velvety darkness. You are safe in the dark. You step out of the room into the corridor of time. You are floating back, drifting away from the noise, drifting away from the fear, drifting towards the present moment. Feel the bed underneath you. It is soft and supportive. Feel the blanket over you. It is warm and heavy. Feel the air in your room. It is cool and still. The past cannot touch you here. The dancers are at rest. The city is at peace. And you are at peace. Let your eyes be heavy. Let your jaw be loose. Let your shoulders drop. The rhythm of the day is slowing down. Your thoughts are slowing down. Like a leaf floating down a river. Slowly. Gently. Spinning. Coming to rest on the soft bank. There is nothing left to solve. There is nothing left to do. The history is written. The book is shelved. You are simply breathing in and out, in and out. The silence is returning. A deep, ancient silence. The silence of the mountains. The silence of the snow. Sleep now. Drift into the quiet. Let the echo fade away until there is only silence. Good night.